Moving on to the final topic of today's lecture. I know we've been talking a lot about Greek culture, but now we're going to shift from Greece over to Italy. And so if we're going to go back up to the map on where we are covering, we have been covering Greece, right? And we've also covered Alexander the Great's empire. But now we're moving over to Italy itself, okay? And so we'll be covering the Etruscans first in this lecture, and then next time we'll begin with the Romans, okay? And so Italy is going to be very important because of both of these civilizations. So let's talk a little bit about the Etruscans, since they were more powerful earlier on than the Romans. First, the Etruscans were not an originally Italian people. Okay, they actually probably came from Asia Minor, so Turkey, present-day Turkey, okay? So if, again, we go all the way back up to the map here, again, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Asia Minor, okay? Turkey is Asia Minor, so they probably came from here. They might have even come from the country of Lydia. Remember the country of Lydia that got into the war with Persians and was eventually defeated? Remember Croesus of Lydia with the coinage? We originally have heard from ancient sources that that is where they came from, although we are not sure if those are true or correct or not. But originally, early sources said they came from directly Lydia, but archaeological evidence and other evidence doesn't confirm or deny that, one way or another, okay? We don't know if they just came from Asia Minor or the country of Lydia before that, or somewhere else. Either way, we know that they probably migrated to Italy around the year 800 BCE, okay? So, before even Greece was doing the Greco-Persian Wars or anything like that, like 400 years before that even. So quite a while beforehand. We do know that when the Etruscans, or whoever these people were when they showed up, okay, we have since called them the Etruscans because of their area of Etruria, which is this area of yellow area where they lived. We know that when they showed up, they were very hostile towards the native Italian peoples that were living there. Okay, there were multiple different tribes living throughout the Italian peninsula of present-day Italy, okay? And they were very hostile to them. And we'll talk about some of those different groups when we talk about the Romans specifically, but in general, just know that the Etruscans were hostile towards basically everyone else in this area. We do also know that they were not an Indo-European language group, which is very interesting. They are from basically Europe, right? Or in Asia area, which is Asia Minor, okay? That is usually that same area where Indo-European languages are coming from. But their language group, from what we can tell, is very different than anything else on that Indo-European language tree, okay? On either side, the European side or the Indo side. Very, very different, okay? They lived in Etruria. Well, again, we've talked about that very briefly, which is today known as Tuscany in Italy. It's the area of Tuscany. Maybe a couple of you have been there. Maybe you've just seen movies or whatever on that area, okay? A lot of wine making in that area, okay? They developed many separate cities, all these little red dots in this area, up in this yellow area, as well as one down here. All these red dots were their different cities. They were individual city-states, very similar to like how Greece was, okay, and ancient Sumeria. Remember, they were all individual city-states in those civilizations. But each of them, just like those places of Greece as well as Sumeria, they had their similar language and customs throughout all of it. So, individual governments, but very similar culture and language. But no one single government. Not one single government. They were all independent city-states. Okay? And so let's move on to a little bit more about them. This is their version of writing. And it says there's no version of written documents. These aren't really written documents. These are kind of like written sections of art. Okay? These are parts of art. They're not really full-on documents. We don't have scrolls. We don't have huge amounts of tablets. We only have a couple in a couple of their grave sites. okay, and former cities. That's about it. That's all we have left of their written language. We call it Tyresian, their language Tyresian. We can't really read it today because we don't have enough of it. Again, we only have these versions of it in a couple places on gold in art, as well as on the side of a tomb, scribbled something about it, something there, and then written on this one here, carved and written on these, or indented into a golden tablet, which is art, again, and it's all just like on the side of a grave. It's nothing big. We don't have any of their actual writings. We do know that what we have been able to read of the language, we can't actually understand it, but we can read it, right? We can see see of the letters and things, okay? We know that they derived their alphabet from the Greek alphabet, and that kind of backs up the idea that they came from Asia Minor, okay, and near Asia Minor, or maybe they interacted heavily with the Greek colonies on the coast of Sicily, like Syracuse, or on the coast of southern Italy, or even up here. And so there might have been a lot of interaction between the Greeks and the Etruscans, and that's why. We're not exactly sure why they had a Greek-style alphabet, though. Okay? But again, only fragments remain on art, and so we just don't have enough to be able to fully translate it. But we're still undergoing a lot. In fact, when I was your age, about 15 years ago, I was actually, 15 to 20 years ago, I actually studied the Etruscans, and there was hardly anything on them. Since then, we've almost doubled, if not quadrupled, the amount of information we know about them. It's very interesting. In just 15 years, we've learned so much more about them. Okay? We do know now that they were artisans. They traded with Greece as well as the Greek colonies. Okay? And so that's very interesting that they traded with the Greeks. And they absorbed a lot of the Greek culture as well as the language. But we don't know if they came up with their own language on their own and then kind of copied the alphabet, or if they kind of adapted their alphabet into the Greek alphabet once they met the Greeks. We don't know exactly how that happened, okay? We do know that they traded a lot of bronze as well as iron to other groups as well as the Greeks. Iron, very important, right? At this point, the Greeks have moved out of the Bronze Age and moved into the Iron Age. Well, the Etruscans, they were able to work with iron. And the difference is that iron is harder to heat up, right, and melt to be able to carve things out of, make things out of it. They also traded with the Carthaginians, which this is North Africa right here, the northern tip of Africa. They actually talked to the North Africans, and they actually made an alliance with the North Africans, or the Carthaginians in North Africa, in 535 BCE. The Carthaginians, we actually know this because of the Carthaginians rather than the Etruscans. We actually have records in the Carthaginian histories about them trading with the Etruscans for iron and other things in the Mediterranean Sea. And so it's very interesting about that. We do know that the Latin tribes, okay, basically the Romans that lived in these areas, in southern Italy as well as central Italy, rebelled against the Etruscans in 509 BCE. Okay, and at some point the Etruscans kind of ruled over them, and that these Latin tribes, the people that lived here in Italy originally, the native Italians, okay, revolted against the Etruscans, and that between 509 and 474 there was multiple wars and revolts between the Latin tribes, including the Romans, and the Etruscans, and by 474 BCE, the Latin tribes were fully independent, and then even started going to war against the Etruscans after that, continuing, but by then they had won their independence from the Etruscans. Lastly, Etruscan death customs. Very interesting right here. We do know that religion was extremely, extremely important to the Etruscan people. It dominated their everyday life. We've talked a lot about that with other civilizations, like the Greeks. They had their gods for one of everything. There was a god for everything, okay? The Romans are going to be very similar to that. Other civilizations are very similar to that as well. But in this case, the Etruscans, they based their entire daily lives off their religion, okay? And they felt that the gods spoke to them through nature, and that weather was a sign from the gods. Many other civilizations believed that as well. They also believed that the Etruscans, if they neglected the dead would come back and haunt them. And so they figured out, or they figured to themselves, that they had to make sure that when a person died, that person had everything they would ever need, and would have this beautiful grave site. And so you end up having, this is a tomb. This is very beautiful, right? But this right here, these are two bodies. This is where these two people were buried. And they had art on the wall, and they had a little sculpture on the wall indented into it. They had very nice beds basically made. Their roof of the tomb was even painted. Everything was painted. Belongings were even stored in this little box with them. And so they felt that the Etruscan people, when a person died, they had to build these decorated sarcophagi, not just like the Egyptians did to their gods or to their pharaohs, right? But they did it for everybody. They treated everybody like this. It's very interesting that the Etruscan death customs were like this. They often also cremated the dead, okay, and decorated their urns. These are actually cremated urns where the cremated bodies are. As opposed to doing this, which might have been for a more wealthy family, this would have been maybe for a poorer family. But again, it's still very decorated, okay? And then this is actually a sarcophagus, which would have been replacing one of these in another tomb, where it's kind of basically these two people holding each other, and holding basically another person below them. And this would have been the sarcophagus for a single person. Maybe this was their family. Maybe it was their gods. We don't exactly know. But it's very interesting that they built such elaborate places for the dead. And this is, again, different pictures of their tombs on the outside. If you went into one of these holes, okay, or one of these doorways, you would end up seeing this, okay? And sometimes there would be just sometimes these rooms that were very decorated, very similar to this, and instead of having bodies laying there in sarcophagi or like this, they'd have had shelves upon shelves of urns like this that were very immaculately sculpted and decorated. We have an Etruscan mummy. Yes, they were wrapped in mummy bandages that have survived, so we do know a little bit about them genetically because of this, and have been doing tests on that DNA-wise. And we also know that the wrappings themselves, the wrappings of the bandages around their body, had writing on it. But we don't, again, know what it says, okay? We can't really read it. Last things about the Etruscans, or a couple last things, is one of their things was architecture, which was extremely important to them. They had, of course, these beautiful rooms which were vaulted, and you can kind of see this curved ceiling, right? Well, this is exactly how it would have looked on the inside or from the outside, depending on the angle that you're looking at it. And if this isn't actually Etruscan right here. This is actually a vaulted ceiling from a later period, okay? But if you look at it, it's an archway, right? And then if you extend the archway and then add another archway on two different sides, right? And then as well on this one, you kind of get this arch that extends, and then you have kind of these weird vaulted triangles, and so that's what it looks like, these vaulted ceilings due to an arch. An arch is this curved doorway, okay? And so, very interestingly, the architecture was very important to them, and as you can see again, their vaulted ceilings were even in their tombs. The Etruscans shared a very common culture with the Romans later on, and that might also possibly because the Romans, which were one of those Latin tribes, developed a lot of ideas from the Etruscans early on, and then adopted it to their own ideas, okay? And they had the gods of Jupiter, which was their version of Zeus, Minerva, which was their version of Hera, etc., and Juno, etc., okay? So the Etruscans and the Romans basically had the same pantheon as the Greeks, just different names, but it is very interesting that the Romans, the Etruscans, and the Greeks all had very similar ideas about religion. And then finally, the last part is about Etruscan pottery. We have Etruscan pottery, and Etruscan era pottery found all over central and northern Italy. Okay, so if we go to the map, all over this area, North Italy, as well as Central Italy, okay? So all the way up and down this area, as well as little bits in this area as well, but mostly in this yellow shaded areas and over here as well, okay? And that makes sense, because that's where their civilization lived. But we have many, many copies of it, and it's very interesting. Those copies, we've done dating periods on them, and we know that they live back from the 800s BCE, which is right around when they supposedly showed up in Italy, to around 200 BCE, when they were probably defeated by the Romans, okay, from what we know about the Romans. They were influenced by the Greek art after the 600s, probably because of trade with the Greek colonies, as well as Greece itself. They had very vivid colors. Of course, this duck vase or vase has kind of faded in color, and it's only just like two colors, like this tannish color and black, but it probably was very vibrant in color. And if you actually look at the picture here, this is red and different things, and they have different colors on some of these things here. And so their pottery would have been very colorful as well, okay? As opposed to Greek pottery, which was usually either just black or yellow, because they put the pottery in the oven after they painted it, as opposed to painting it afterwards to have the colors, okay? They wanted the colors to be part of the sculpture itself, okay? But the Etruscans actually painted it afterwards as well. The Etruscan pottery was not always made in the standard shapes, okay? The standard urn shapes that we had in the Greek pottery section, those just standard vase shapes, like flower vases or vases or just urns. They were Greeks and Romans always used those shapes. The Etruscans, they came up with all sorts of different shapes based on animals and different people and things like that, as apparent in this one made in the 300s BCE, which is a duck, right? And has a person on the side of it, okay? And possibly a person's face there, I'm not exactly sure, but it's very interesting that the Etruscans were very different in their own way with pottery, as opposed to the Romans and Greeks, which were very standard and, like, kind of just keep it simple. Other than maybe the art on it, keep the actual structure of it simple. While the Etruscans went to town not just on the art on the outside of it, but the shape of it itself. Okay? And so that's about it on the Etruscans. One interesting last thing, I will give you a little bit of a tidbit. I had to do a project in 2002 on the Etruscans, and I had to call them in the middle of the night. This was pre-internet being all night long kind of thing and stuff like that. I had to use dial-up internet to contact them, and finally got through to an email number to contact one of their cities. And I called up their city for this history project, and while I was calling them on the phone, I kept on asking them to send me information so I could do a school report in college on the Etruscans. Well, eventually, 3 months later, I got this giant envelope in the mail after my project was already due, and it told me all about one of the Etruscan cities, and it basically showed where maps of the city were, and kind of the architecture and maps of the city, and the scope of the city, as well as pictures. Some of these pictures are actually from that package they sent me, and interestingly, the last bit of information on the package was about where the snack bar was if you wanted to go and visit the city today in, well, 2002. If I wanted to go visit it, make sure to check out the important snack bar. And it wasn't the Etruscan snack bar, it was just the snack bar where all the historians would go and when they were trying to do excavations of the city. So, kind of funny and interesting story that all of this information was kind of useless to me after the fact. Be thankful I'm not having you call Italy in the middle of the night to try to find out information on these people, because some history professors are cruel like that, even though you'll love them years later for silly projects like that. Have a great night, or have a great day, depending on when you're listening to this, and we will talk about the Romans and begin the Roman Republic next time.